You are listening to Living with ADHD and CPTSD, available on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to an episode of Living with ADHD and CPTSD. Today's episode we're going to talk about, I'm actually going to discuss myself. I am going to introduce as much as possible about who I am. I'll give a bit of a history on my life, and it won't just be about my trauma and ADHD and issues that I've had regarding my mental illnesses and health, but it'd also be kind of like a who's who of my history of my life. And I want to give my audience a much broader understanding of who I am and what I'm about, so that when you listen to my podcasts, you'll have a better grasp of who I have become and what I'm about and the reason that I'm making these podcasts. So I'm going to try and not be too descriptive, because I realize that this could go on forever if I do that. But I will try to be somewhat brief and keep this under an hour, hopefully. It all depends on exactly what it takes for me to get there. All right, so here we go. Okay, so I was born in March of 1978, and I was born in the city of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And at that time, Edmonton was, I think, only about 400,000 people. And I remember seeing lots of pictures of myself when I was a little baby. And I was a nice kid, but I was also, right from the start, a very feisty, and I was the kind of kid that was very, I guess you could say, defensive or skeptical. Like, I wasn't the laid back kind. It was interesting because my dad would always tell stories when we were discussing how I was when I came into the world and when I was born, how from the moment that I came out, I wouldn't let the doctors, I was trying to stop the doctors from putting the tube down my throat to clean it up, and touch me, and I was crying and fighting back. And my brother, who was born 3.5 years later, didn't care. Was like, well, whatever, go ahead, So he was like laid back, not really caring. And I grew up being, from the beginning, I was a very determined child, and I liked to go and explore. I like to do things. I was never one just kind of stay in one place. There are photos of me from when I'm in my infant, 2-3 years old kind of setting, where I'm walking around, going and visiting places like the fire hydrant, and apparently I was friends with the fire hydrant. And I also heard a story where my parents were with me at the mall in St. Albert, which is a smaller city just northwest of Edmonton. And we went there, and they lost me by accident, of course. And they were looking for me, and they thought I'd be scared and I'd be crying and everything. But when they found me with the security guard, I was just fine. I was happy and oblivious to the fact that I was missing, or that I was lost from my parents. And so I was it kind of was I guess you could say I was an independent kid. And the thing, though, is because of growing up where I had parents that were not always getting along, like they love each other. They've been married for many, many years now. I think they're in their 51st year of marriage, which today is amazing, although there aren't a lot of marriages that are really lasting 10 years, let alone 50 years. And they always argued about certain things like discipline styles when it came to the children, like myself and my brother. And my dad was a very aggressive, outgoing, short-tempered person, or he still is, but he's a very talkative, very expressive and opinionated, and he can get angry quite easily. And when he gets angry about something that he either really doesn't like, or he gets into a discussion and it angers him, it's extremely difficult to turn him down or to get him to stop. You have to multiple times really push and remind him and repeat your demand to say, come on, enough, stop, this is too far, we get it already. He just gets into this mode where once he's on the train, that anger train, that temper train, and that train is going extremely fast and on tracks that are not exactly the best when it comes to stability, which doesn't help. One thing, once you guys realize, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do a lot of metaphors when it comes to describing and explaining scenarios because I find it easier, and it works for the most part. People get it. Anyway, okay, so he was that way, and my mother is a different breed. My two families that I know, like my mother's side and my dad's side, they're quite different. My dad's side is very loud and very open and friendly and fun and excitable. And they're a family of 9 brothers and sisters, and of course their parents, and they all grew up pretty poor. They didn't exactly have a lot of money. They lived in a house with only 3 bedrooms, and the fortunate thing, thankfully, is that not all 9 children were living at home at the same time. That would have been extremely horrible conditions. So there were at times where the 3, I think at most 3 sisters would be in 1 bedroom, and the 3 brothers that were still at home would be in the other bedroom. And they were born pretty far apart. The first child was born in 1941, and the last child was born in 1963. And so they're spread apart. So when the younger of the family were living at home, the older ones were out, being independent, doing their thing, getting education, whatever they had to do, right? So they were never all at home, but they grew up in, like I said, a small house, and they lived in a city in Saskatchewan, which is the province to the right of us. I'm describing this for people who don't live in Canada and don't really don't know too much about it, for those Canadians that are listening. So yeah, Saskatchewan is just to the right of Alberta, and the drive to the city that they lived in, the name is Saskatoon, and it's about a 5-hour, 20-minute drive from where I live currently. And they all lived there, and they were, like I said, they were poor. They didn't have money. My grandfather worked 6 days of the week, and my grandmother was the stay-at-home mom, took care of all the kids, did the cooking, did the laundry, did the cleaning, and I believe the older sisters at one point helped out, and the men in the family did things like bring in the coal once a week or so for the furnace. This was before they had gas heating, of course, way before. And they didn't even have an inside toilet until a number of years down the road. So it was very different conditions. And like compared to today, we would think that this was like really bad third world conditions compared to how we have it. Anyway, I don't want to go too far into that. So they all grew up in this house in this small city, and it wasn't a very big city by any means in the 50s and 60s and 70s before everybody started to really kind of grow out and move on their own and stuff. And the one thing that I remember is there was a lot of rivalries. Like, imagine, if you can, 5 brothers, all different age ranges, trying to get along, trying to attract their parents' affection and care. And it wasn't easy, obviously. And they all grew up living in a house that was under abuse. Like, my grandfather was not exactly what you would call the most gentle person. Like, I didn't know him too well. From the point that I remember him, which was like 1983, I think it was 82 or 83. I only knew him for about 7-8 years, and he soon, not too many years before he died, was developing Alzheimer's, and so he wasn't exactly all there. By the time I was 12, he died. He passed away. So I didn't really know him too well. I only knew him based on my memories and the things that I've been told up to this point. So my understanding of my grandfather was that he was a very artistic kind of person, very musical, loved doing things for the community. He was the caretaker for the local hockey rink, and he was he never went to World War II, but he was in the military and never saw battle, fortunately. And I didn't learn about the fact that my grandfather was a very abusive person when it came to his family. I didn't realize this till very recently, that there were things that happened that no one's ever talked about, except for a few people that I have, sat down and talked about my issues that I've been dealing with, and in turn learned about the family history, and that this isn't the first time that this has come up. The generational trauma and abuse that has been passed down has obviously come from multiple generations within the family. And it was at that time when my aunts and uncles were like in their early years, it wasn't really seen as any other way but as just that the man of the house is in charge. And abuse, whether it was physical or emotional, mental, anything, was never questioned. And that's like I discussed in an episode that's coming out in a little while. It's a common thing, and people growing up at that age or time, the word abuse and neglect was not really a thing then. It was just kept under wraps, and it was the emotional build-up and the mental pain that was developing. It just was never really brought up because it wasn't a thing compared to like today. If we had today's sort of support and guidance back in the 50s and 60s, I'm sure things would have been very different. Anyway, so yeah, they were, a lot of stuff happened, and I'm not really going to get into too many details because that's not the purpose of this episode, but it works into some stuff that I'm going to talk about later on here in this episode regarding myself. So my mother now. Okay, so my mother is from a family of 8, four sons and daughters. She is the oldest of the 8, and she was, the interesting part about this, which is kind of neat, is that my dad and my mom were born 28 days apart in the same year. And she was born in a town about an hour west of Saskatoon named Biggar, Biggar, not like bigger as in big, right? Like I'm bigger than you kind of thing. So she was born, and the firstborn. And so then there were a bunch of sisters and brothers that came. And her father was a train engineer that was in the Second World War. Second World War. And he was a train engineer when he came back. And he also ran, until his passing, a convenience store down at the corner of the main street of Biggar. And he was, I obviously didn't know him because he passed away about 3 months after I was born. So obviously it was impossible for me to have any kind of memories or any knowledge of him personally. I don't know a ton about him. I know that he was like a strict person when it came to rules and growing up, and he was a very straight and narrow kind of guy. I have no doubt that if he had survived, if he hadn't unexpectedly passed away shortly after I came into the world and I had got to know him, I have a feeling he could have been a very nice person and would have been a very loving grandparent. But who knows? Obviously, we'll never know. And the amount of information that I've learned about my mother's family is minimal compared to my father's side. And I think a lot of that is because they don't really talk a lot about their family very much. They've had family reunions. There's a book out that one of my uncles who passed away a few years ago has, and the family kind of created this family history book, like a genealogy book, but there's not really a lot of details compared to like my father's side. It's like minimal, so I don't have a ton of knowledge about things that went on in that family. I know that my grandmother was like, they were definitely religious. They went to church all the time. On my dad's side, my grandmother was very religious too. She was a Mennonite that was converted to Catholic, Roman Catholic, and she was a devout Christian devout Catholic who went to church every weekend. And a lot of I think my entire family, if I remember correctly, did as well. And so they were both Roman Catholic. And I remember when I went as a child, when I went to see my grandmother on my mom's side, and it just happened to be that we were there during the weekend, which more often than not was the case, that we'd go too. And I don't know, I never really enjoyed it. It was kind of boring. To most kids at that age, church is boring anyways. And I never really enjoyed it. I don't know what it was, but I never really enjoyed as I got older, I never enjoyed being around my mom's side of the family. Like the nephews, like my cousins that are obviously around, were cool to hang out with, but they were just never. It wasn't quite the same. I didn't get to see them nearly as often as on my dad's side, and there was just something about that family. There was like a disconnect to some degree. Now, my grandmother, who passed away in 2002 or 3, I wish I had the info. I should have maybe done a bit of research, but as again, this is live. She passed away from different complications from diabetes. She had a stroke like a year earlier, and she passed away. And the family has a history of obesity. Of all the family members in that group, there were only 3 of them that weren't really overweight. Although later on in the years, like in current times, there's only one that is still overweight. A number of them have come to realize that it's important to try and live healthy. So a lot of them have lost a lot of weight. They've gone on diets and have improved their lifestyle and their habits. I actually haven't even seen one of them yet. It's since this has been done, and my memory of this person is nothing like how he is now, but I haven't seen him yet, so I have no idea. But one of them passed away from a heart attack in 2012. He had a problem. He had a heart problem for a number of years before that, so it wasn't a big surprise, but yeah, it's never obviously something that you expect, even if there are known history issues with health. So they both have their own good set points and their bad points regarding the way that they develop, like the way they grew up, the way that their parents raised their children. Keep in mind, they're both from the same time frame. The difference is that my mother is the firstborn, and all the children came after that up into the late 60s, early 70s, I believe. And then my father's side, my dad is like 6th of 9. And one of my uncles passed away on my dad's side in 1981 of a motorcycle accident. So there's only 8 currently that are still alive. And both my grandparents obviously passed away. So I have no grandparents now. And so they're from the same time frame. It's just that they're different as far as when they were born. And if you look at it in another angle, on my father's side, of the 33 cousins, and this is not including all the second and third cousins, because there have been a lot that have been born. But of all the cousins that came from the brothers and sisters, I was in the middle. I am the 8th born cousin or nephew, niece in the family on my dad's side. And on the mother's side, I am the firstborn nephew. So I am the first cousin on my mom's side. So you can tell the difference. There's not a whole lot of change, but it's just that my mother's side is very, I wouldn't say conservative, like religiously necessarily. Don't get me wrong. They're not like Bible thumpers. They don't believe all that necessarily, but if you want to compare the two, my dad's side, they're all loud, they're very boisterous, energetic, goofy, extremely friendly, very loving. They like all people, but they're argumentative and they're very tough on each other, but they get along. Like most of the time they get along. Now, my mom's side is like pretty much the opposite. They're quiet, they're reserved, they don't really talk about things unless it blows up and they're like, and just they can't handle it anymore. They are friendly, but they're not open and boisterous. They're very reserved. They're calm. They like to have good conversations, but they're not anything like my dad's side. So you can imagine the two differences getting together. My dad and my mom. They're different in their own unique way. When there's gatherings, like, and it doesn't matter which side it is. If we go to a gathering on my mom's side, or if there's a gathering on my father's side, the way things go is the same. It's always my dad is really the talkative one. He's always interacting with everybody. He's loud. He does a lot of talking. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of laughing, jokes, and over the top kind of stuff. And my mom, for the most part, is quiet and kind of sits there and says the odd thing and reacts most of the time and doesn't say much. If she's interacting with her sisters or brothers, there's definitely more. Like it comes out more, but she's always been the quiet type compared to my dad. At home, she is definitely more talkative and she comes out more. She's not so closed off compared to in groups, but there's a definite difference. You can see the difference. It's very, very clear. If you were to sit down with my parents and have me there and everything and have a discussion about whatever you want, you'd be able to tell that my dad is the one that does a lot of the talking. He's the very open-minded, open, talkative, opinionated, very expressive person, where my mother is the one that tends to just kind of sit there and observe and listen and say the odd things if someone interacts with her. But she's not the one to necessarily initiate it too often. So that came into me. So I have a mixture of both of these. So I have the loud, talkative, very expressive, very opinionated half, and then I have the closed off, quiet, thoughtful, shy-ish, more conservative types. I have a good mix of that inside of me. Now, so you can imagine how the way I was raised influenced how I grew up, right? Like I faced a disciplinary style from a person who was very short-tempered, got extremely angry very fast, was very aggressive when it came to his disciplinary actions, and I developed trauma and childhood trauma from it because I was so scared and so frightened of it, and it still affects me today. And my mom, when she gets upset, like if something upsets her, it's like she can fly off the handle really good. And it's incredible. It's like you have this container with a lid on it, and there's all this built up feelings and emotions, and like it just wants to burst, right? But the lid is on tight, and if you turn it the right way, aka if you agitate and you piss her off, that lid will come off, and it's like all that energy and all that anger and that stress that is just dying to come out appears, and it's like, holy crap, where did that come from? It's you don't see it very often except when she gets angry, and as soon as it's passed, it's like it voluntarily goes back into the container, and the lid turns on, and it's fine. So you can kind of see now more as to how I was raised as a child from the very beginning. My parents obviously were new. They didn't have a lot of understanding and experience by any means when it came to raising a child. I was the firstborn, and I was the one that they kind of learned off of. And from an early age, whenever I got into trouble, whether I was a bad kid or I did something by accident, just from being a child, and kids are kids, they behave a certain way. That's just the way it is. I got disciplined in a way that today would be considered child abuse, and would probably take your child, like that kid, away from their parents, citing that that's physical abuse and that's child abuse and that is not accepted. And I know that that's a common thing in most places, like even especially in the United States and in Canada. It is on an unaccepted and a very, like, well, not banned, but it is definitely shunned as far as a disciplinary style. Like, I was spanked whenever I got into trouble, and it was from both sides. It was from my mom and my dad. And as I was saying, I had traumatic events because of it, and I grew up fearing them. Well, mostly my dad, and I became super hypervigilant and fully aware, and I developed such an anxious feeling and such a crazy anxiety because of it, because I was always fearing what would happen. Like, you never knew, right? Because he loses his temper at a lot of different things, and it's things that I'm sure most of us would find to be ridiculous. Our cable company has something go wrong, and he flies off the handle, and he's upset at them, and he's yelling in the phone and giving them hell, and nobody can really call him off or tell him to stop. Like, it's like once he's gone, he's gone, and the only one that can calm him down is himself. And it's not a quick procedure. It takes time. It's pretty nasty when it does happen, and it's one of those things that he developed, and he has his own trauma and his own experiences from his life that he has brought on to his children and even his wife, which is very common today amongst a lot of people. A good majority of the population has the same problem, where their children were abused through their family, and they learn that style and that method, and they put it upon their children, and those children grow up with the same thing, and unless they stop it, they put it on their children. So it's a cycle that just from generation to generation, and it's a very, very, very common thing all over the world. And that, well, I'm not really into that, just that part of the top. This isn't the topic that I'm talking about, so I won't really go into that today. But yeah, so I grew up with that kind of discipline, and I developed childhood trauma because it was chronic and repetitive, and I grew up fearing the wrath of my dad whenever I could possibly get into trouble. So I tried effortlessly, as hard as I could, to avoid getting into trouble, and that developed into this method of just the way I am, like avoiding conflict, being like, I developed a defensive style. I developed a lot of anxiety, I had a lot of stressful situations, and it became worse and developed further in school, because I wasn't exactly, when I started school, I wasn't the nicest, most well-behaved child. And by that time, by the time I was 5, I was already developing and had the start of ADHD. I was a very inattentive kid. I didn't pay attention well. I had a hard time focusing. I took out frustration on other students. I was not a very well-behaved kid, but at the same time, neither my teacher or my parents really understood what was going on. They had no idea. back then, ADHD had nobody really understood it. It was still in its infancy at that time. So if it had been brought up, there probably would have been a complete shock, and I can't see my parents putting any kind of tests out to see if I had it. And as I grew up, as I went into grade by grade, I eventually realized that if I want to get by here, and I want to be a nice kid, or I want to have be on my teacher's good side, I have to change my behavior. Now, as a 7-year-old kid going into grade 3, it's not as easy as you would think. And especially the fact that I have ADHD at that time, and my ability to pay attention on a regular basis and concentrate on the class and stay focused and not have daydreams and get distracted and not be paying attention, which is very regular unless it's something that is extremely fun or interesting to me. I often get distracted. And I struggled in school when it came to grades. Like I never failed. I never got held back. And I passed. I went through all my grades. It's just, I guess you could say I did enough each year to get through. But there were certain things that I struggled with. Now, I do know how to read. I would say if you put it on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being an excellent reader, I would say I was probably at a 7, maybe 7.5 out of 10. I wasn't the best reader in the world, but I could definitely read. It's just that I had no interest. And even today still, when I am reading a book, I easily get distracted, and I have a hard time staying focused on the topic and what I'm reading, and I easily get distracted. And then maybe a half an hour at the most, I can't read anymore. I end up putting the book down and doing something else because I can't stay focused on it, and I lose the will to continue. And again, that's another ADHD related symptom. And so what ends up happening is I go on and do other things. Like I find activities that would interest me. And this is a regular thing with me. And in school, despite my best efforts, I struggled. I was never really great at any kind of English courses. As I've explained in previous episodes in the past on this show, I never got anything higher than a 59 in any of my English courses, all the way through, including high school. I never did well. And, I tried. It's not like I didn't care or I didn't want to participate. I did my best. I did whatever I could to get through and pass, but I just struggled. I do not have a really good concept and grasp of grammar and the English language when it comes to comprehension and understanding. I'm not great when it comes to verbal communication, and I often am very generic or very vague whenever I'm communicating to people, although I am convinced that has a lot to do with trauma and my past. So that is something that I'm currently investigating. Now, as I was growing up, when I turned 5, I learned to skate when I was 4. I wanted to play hockey. I grew up in a family that was very sports oriented. They loved hockey. They loved football. I was a kid who was involved in multiple sports. The first sport that I ever really played was soccer for 1 year. I think I was 4 years old, and I played, I don't know what they called it back then, but I played soccer with a bunch of kids. And when I was 5, like I said, I already knew how to skate. I picked it up really easy. I learned very fast, and I wanted to play hockey. So my dad put me into hockey at 5, and I was pretty good. I wasn't great. I'd never say I had any chance really of ever making it anywhere. Like I'd never would have been a professional. My skating needed a lot of work, and my work ethic was left a lot to be desired. But yeah, I played from age 5 till I was 14, and I really enjoyed it. As the years moved on and I got towards the end of my hockey career, I would have loved to have played more, but it just, the timing and the way the system where I live works, it just wasn't possible. So I gave it up. Now, I also played baseball, and the sport that was most important to me and to my father was football. I was involved in football from the age of 6, but not in a playing way. My father was a football coach. He was the head coach of the local team, ages 11 to 15, for, about 4 years. And during that time, I always came to practice. I went to the games. It was funny. I was involved in practicing, and I was like kind of like a pretend coach, right? But I remember I did run drills on occasion, and it was kind of fun. And the players adopted me as like the mascot or like the kid coach. And I remember during that time, and even before, I learned how to throw the ball. Like I had this, it was interesting. I knew so much about the game of football at such an early age that it was incredible. My dad was quite astonished and impressed at the knowledge and how well I could do it. I didn't have, because we didn't have football, like we didn't have minor football. Like when I mean minor, we didn't have football for ages. In Canada, the earliest you can start playing football is 9. And so when I was 6, there was no football for kids back then. And I still think there isn't, if I remember correctly. I think the minimum age is 8 now. So the Bantam team, which is that level that he coached, I think they changed their ages from to 12. I think it's 12 to 15 or 16. I can't remember the exact numbers, but he had to create another sports team in the town that we lived in. And I was 11. So the year before, I remember going out and watching some football in a town called Sherwood Park, which is about 10-20 minutes east of Edmonton. It's a really big football town. They got multiple teams, high school, minor football, and so on. And I went out, and this was like, wow, this is so exciting. I couldn't wait, because I had to wait a year in order to play, because we needed to get the team approved and everything. And so, yeah, my first year was 11, and amongst all the players in the team, none of us had played officially, but I was the only one that really knew anything about the sport. Like, even though I never played, I had a lot of knowledge. I had a lot of information. I knew how things worked. I knew how to do stuff, and it was a blessing for us in a way. Even though we didn't do well that first year, you could tell that I was different. I had to step up on all the players on my team because of my knowledge and my past. And so I played 8 years. I went into high school, and I had the possibility of going to junior football, which I guess if you want to put it, see, up here in the States, I understand how your football works. You've got high school, you've got college football, you've got different levels of college football, like tier 2, tier 3, tier 1, which is obviously NCAA, the top, where majority of the players get drafted from. Here we've got university football, which is our top level. And then we have like a junior league, which is for players who aren't quite ready to play university football and can't go back obviously to high school because they're too old. So a lot of times, some of them end up playing a couple of years and then go to university when they're ready. And then some that just aren't ready aren't able to play university will end up playing 4 seasons in the junior. I had the chance to try out for a team in British Columbia, which is the province west of us. And I still had a possibility of going back for another year to play high school because I was still eligible, which is kind of odd. If you don't understand, it's just the way things work here. But the second year when I went back, the team had all coaches changed. Like it was a different new staff, so it kind of went sour. But I decided I had enough. I had a shoulder injury that had caused problems. I couldn't throw the ball like I used to, and it was just too much. And I remember I kind of had this choice to make. I could either go and try out for the team in Saskatoon, which is like, if you want to look at the best teams in junior football in Canada, this is probably the best team that junior football has. They've won the most Canadian titles out of all the teams. They're an extremely good football team. They're really well run. They're the top. Like, not too many teams ever really challenge them. But anyways, I had an opportunity to go into a camp, but I decided to go to school and go to university because education was more important, and I believed that I just didn't, I knew my time was done. I wasn't going to go anywhere. I didn't want to play football anymore. My shoulder was just too bad. And so that was that. I went to school. I took a management course, and then that was a 1-year course, although I wish I had taken it in 2. And at this point, I was 19. And at this point, I wasn't aware, and there was no knowledge for myself of my ADHD, of my trauma. I hadn't gotten to a point yet where it was coming up. Like it was becoming a factor in my day-to-day life. I was 19. I was still living at home. I was pretty sheltered. I didn't really have any friends. The friends that I had throughout my school years from when I was 5 all the way to like 17, 18 were pretty much, we no longer really hung out. I was on my own. So it was like I had really no friends, literally. And all I ever did was go to school, and then I'm at home. And so my habits changed. Things really kind of changed for me. I was no longer athletic, like where I'm always playing a sport, and my metabolism was starting to drop, and I was not active like I used to be, not even close. And so I started to put some weight on slowly, and I went from when I was 18, I weighed 165 pounds. And by the time I was like 22, I was about 185. And I remember I was very inactive. I didn't really do much for any kind of activity. Life had just become very different for me. I was doing work as a pizza delivery guy. I wanted to go. I remember when I went to university or to college, I initially wanted to take a computer course. I wanted to go and learn computers, like networking, internet technology, all that stuff. But when I brought it up to my parents, I remember them saying that they didn't know the school. They weren't sure that it would be a good thing for me to do because obviously it costs money to go. And despite my intentions in saying I really want to do this, they convinced me that the better thing to do would to go to like Grant MacEwan Community College, which is a college in Edmonton that deals with business and art and all, like multimedia kind of things. And I took a business course there, management studies, and for the most part it went well, but it was kind of a waste of time because I never did officially finish and I never graduated with my diploma, which if I could have fought back and I hadn't have been so scared or so influenced by my family, I should have taken that damn computer course. I should have gone and done my network studies because I ended up going anyways in 2001. I got my course done. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was pretty much lost, and I regret some of the things that I did. I did that course and I didn't finish it. For some stupid reason, I thought, I'll become a dog groomer. So in 2000, I went to this dog grooming school in Leduc, which is like about 45 minutes southeast of where I lived at the time. And I did that for 6 months. And I never, even though I completed it and I'm officially, I'm a certified dog groomer, I never did use it. I'm a man in an industry where it's pretty much dominated by women. There aren't very many male dog groomers out there. Anytime you go to a dog grooming shop, the odds are is you're going to see a woman in there doing the work. I don't know too many male dog groomers. I've never seen them in the windows. Anyway, so I never did anything with it, but I use it for my own dogs, which is nice because I don't trust any people working on my dog. I do it myself. So I did that. And then like I said, in 2001, I finally started the networking and internet technology course, was a year. And things finally started to turn around. I almost aced that course. I was I think it was like 6.6 something % off from being an honor student in the 90s. I was very close. I did well. It was a self-taught course. I learned on my own pace. I taught myself. I did so well, and it was incredible. I loved it. And I remember it was from that point on that my destiny was set. And it was a little slow. It took a few years for things to kind of take off because, I got a job with a company called Comcast, which I know you guys are obviously very familiar with in the US. But in 2003, we had, I think it was about a year and a half, we had a call center in Edmonton. And it was called Convergys. It was so ridiculous. I have nothing good to say about that company. I don't even know if they still exist today, but I did a calling center and I was tech support for Comcast, and I didn't like it. I had to do something. Obviously, I needed to make money. I needed to earn a living. But I didn't like it. I was doing night shift. I was working till like 10, 11 at night. Fortunately, I didn't do any overnight stuff, but yeah, I was working the night shift, or the evening shift, I should say, and I just didn't like it. I hated the job. It was too much pressure, too much demand, too many rules. Anybody out there who works in a call center, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It's all about metrics. It's all about numbers, right? Like they want to get as many calls in as possible. They want to have your calls as short as possible. The less time you spend on the phone with someone, the more time you'll be able to spend with other customers. Because if you're if you're spending all your time with one customer, that means there's another customer out there that's waiting in order to get helped, right? So that's the whole method. That's the whole purpose of it. So the goal is to be on the phone for only so many minutes, only do so much troubleshooting, and then determine where to go next. And I don't deal with that today, obviously, but I have seen, because where I work, our first level of support is call center or a service desk. And oh geez, it's not something I would recommend unless you absolutely must do it. And so I just remember slacking off, and I had no interest. I didn't want to do it, but I was just kind of hanging on. And then I got let go, and I did for a year or so. I worked for an office supply store, and in that time I was trying to find a decent job. I remember Dell came to Edmonton in 2006. They decided to open another call center in Edmonton. And I remember saying to myself, this is before the interview, I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to do this again. I had a bad experience the first time I did call center. And I just remember somebody convinced me, and I got a call. I made a call. I sent in my resume, and I got a call for an interview. And it just felt different. It felt like it was actually not a bad thing. It was different metrics, different setup. It felt more relaxed. It wasn't like the pressure was nothing like the Convergys place. And it was kind of neat. We were the first group to start a on-call. It was called Dell On Call. Some of you might have had some experience with it. We were doing on-call support for computers that were under warranty for customers in the United States. And we were downtown Edmonton, and I remember they were telling us that they were building a permanent location on the south side of the city that was its own building. It was supposed to be a state-of-the-art, modern place, all this stuff. And I remember when we moved in there, it was actually kind of cool. It was neat. I liked it. It was very different, very open area, like high ceilings. They had quiet rooms, giant parking lot, parks. We were near like the Superstore, which is a grocery store here in Canada. And the only problem and this was just before I was starting to look into getting up into management or like team lead status, because I had been there the entire time from the beginning of the on-call. But we found out that the cost for running the place for Dell in Canada was becoming pricey, because the American dollar was starting to drop, and our Canadian dollar was starting to become more and more valuable. So the price of running business in Canada for this call center was becoming more and more and more expensive. So Dell decided to close the place, which, it's one of those things where if you only knew, you could have avoided it to begin with. So they closed this brand new building that had only been open for a year. They had to sell it. And I remember, it's interesting. I remember the people who bought the place determined that the people who built it were from Texas. And they didn't realize, it's astounding that people can do this, that they're not smart enough to realize the conditions that they're building in. They didn't realize that Canada's weather can get really cold, obviously. And they didn't properly insulate it. It was poorly built. And they had to, when the new place purchased it and took over, they had to basically tear the inside all out and redo it, because it was built in American standards for American kind of weather and American like limits, right? And it was hilarious. I laughed when I was told how badly it was built, and it was ridiculous. And so anyways, I left, and I had to, obviously we were let go, so I had to find another job. I found this is where I struggled. Like, you have to do your dirty work. You have to pay the price before you can finally find the right location, like something that works for you, something that matches your lifestyle and your qualifications, and that is comfortable for you. I went through like 3 places. It was pretty hectic. I worked for ATB, and that I left them about 10 months in to go to work for a law firm in IT support, of course. But that was stupid. Like, it was not, I didn't like it. It was kind of mutual because they fired me after 3 months. I didn't like working there. It was very like a law office, okay? Very stuffy shirt, very like pretentious, very high class. It wasn't at all what I was thinking it was going to be, and it was mostly software support, and I didn't like it. I didn't care for it, and they just let me go. They never really gave me an answer. They didn't give me any kind of a reason for it. It was just, you're not a good fit. So I left, and I didn't have any work for about 4 months, and then I got a job with the city of Edmonton, the municipal government, as of course again in IT, and I was there for about 2 years and a couple months, and it was good at first, but my manager was, I don't know, there's something about him, and it got to the point where I wasn't getting paid all that well compared to today, obviously, and I was starting to hate the place. And something happened. I don't remember exactly what I did, and it broke some of the rules, and they let me go. And that was like the lowest point, I guess, before I had to choose, right? Because I remember I was like deciding, what am I going to do? Do I want to stay in IT? Do I want to find something else? Should I go back to school? Like, I was struggling because I was having a hard time finding work, sending out a lot of resumes, not getting anywhere. And I was starting to get desperate because I was getting close to running out on my benefits, like your support. You get a certain percentage of your earnings every 2 weeks to help you while you're unemployed. And it was starting to get near the end, and I was starting to get desperate. I was doing pizza delivery again to make a few bucks while I was looking, and it was really kind of a bad situation. Now, before I continue on, I'm going to go into a brief talk about some relationship status that I went through now, because that's extremely important, and I need to get into that before too long. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break, and when I come back, we will continue on that. All right, talk to you in a bit. So I had a relationship. It was my first relationship in my life that was, to say it the least, complicated. And the reason I say that is because I was 26 at the time. Yeah, I know, it's a long time. Very few people at 26 have never had a relationship, meaning that they have never had any, intimacy as well. So I was kind of a homebody, and I tried a number of times to date people and never got anywhere. It was always over by the one, or even if I ever got to a second date. And I met her online. It was a chat program that doesn't exist anymore. Back in 2003, and we talked for a little while, and over the time we started to get to know each other, and we became friends, and we met each other. I think this was back in like May or June of 2004. And actually, sorry, no. Now that I realize, I met her in January of 2004. There we go. And we became friends, and we didn't start dating officially until September of that year. And if I had realized what I was getting into back then, I probably would not have done all that I had done with her, because I know now that it never really was going to work. It was a dead end relationship. It's just that I was in a spot in my life where I truly believed that I was never going to find anybody better. I thought, this is it. I was desperate. I had all this internal pressure to like get married, because I was only 26/27. I didn't want to be old and not be married and not have kids, and so there was a lot of pressure internally on myself to make this work. And I had a lot of issues, and if I had known back then that a lot of it was caused by trauma in my life, I could have made a big change. I could have really have done this differently. She was very emotionally abusive. She never was physically abusive, because I was not that, even if I had been small, I don't think she would have been, but I was like much bigger than her, way stronger. And she wasn't a physically abusive person, but she was very manipulative and emotionally abusive. And she would manipulate me in ways that would always make me feel guilty, or I would cower to her demands, and I was afraid to upset her. I didn't want to leave because I was afraid that she would get really upset. I didn't want to make her sad. Like I still had this belief that if she'd just do this, or she would change her ways, or if I could just be a little bolder, then it would work. And the problem was that we were on an on-off again relationship. And we dated the first time for like 4 or 5 months, and then it ended. But the interesting was that we were like friends with benefits, and I don't necessarily regret that part, because I did learn a lot. I gained a lot of experience and understanding of sex. And I wish to some degree that I hadn't, because I missed out on a lot of experiences with other people, with other women that I could have had, but chose not to. Instead, I stuck around. And then we tried to date again, and it didn't last very long, because she cheated on me with her ex-boyfriend. And this is the other thing. Like this was a very incredibly weird situation, and she was like I said, she was manipulative and emotionally abusive. She was like the most neatest freak I've ever met when it came to cleaning. She was so like over the top. It was ridiculous. Like if you ever met anybody who was a clean freak, this person would probably top your person by a mile at least, because it was to the point where nothing could be dirty. Anything in the washroom, anything in the sink, like it was so stupid and so insane. And then the way she was manipulative, and the words she would use, and the thoughts and the things she would say, it would make you just lose your mind. And like, I wish I had been able to see all this in the beginning, because I would have definitely have changed my mind and never done this. But, you know, life has its ways of teaching you lessons, right? So again, this didn't exactly help by any means when it came to growing relationship experience and understanding. And it also added to the trauma that I have, because it's teaching me and showing me, or making me believe that to have a hard time trusting women when it comes to being honest and in a relationship, especially when you're being cheated on. And I remember by the end, it was like, before I met the person that I was with for a year after that, it was just getting to the point where I was like having enough, and I really didn't want to do anything with her anymore. We weren't having, there were no more benefits. It was just friendship, and I was just tired of it, and I didn't want to deal with it anymore. And I finally said enough is enough, and I started looking for like trying to meet somebody else. And I met I met a girl who at the time I thought was amazing, and we hit it off right away, and we started seeing each other a lot, and we got into a relationship, and it was really good. It was so much better. Like it was night and day. And I remember it wasn't too long after that I moved out and into my apartment, and it was great. Like we were really starting, it felt good, and I was happy, and I wasn't thinking about her anymore, like my other girlfriend, and I was so much happier. And the thing, and I didn't notice this because, again, I wasn't mature enough emotionally and mentally to understand and to realize what was coming, because I was so willing to put my needs behind or not care about my own needs, and I was trying to take care of her needs, and I wanted to make her happy, that I was willing to not be as happy for myself. And I remember noticing that there was some interesting and very like major warning signs that I should have noticed. And one was that she had a lot of debt. She was in school, and she was trying to become a biologist, and she spent money like it didn't have to get paid back. She didn't have a lot of money to begin with. She had a number of credit cards, and she was so willing to spend. And the first time I noticed it was when I moved into my place, and we went shopping for like stuff for the house, or for the apartment, right? It was like cookware, utensils, small appliances like a blender and a food processor, which I never ever used when we finally were done. She spent over $400 for me. I didn't put any of my money into that. It was like a gift. And I remember at the time going, wow, you're so generous. This is so amazing. Holy shit. Like it was so incredible. But it didn't even occur to me that this is a sign, this is a warning sign. Like she doesn't really have any kind of financial plan. She doesn't really think about these sort of things. And she keeps getting into more and more debt. And because you're so clouded by your judgment's so clouded because you're thinking, oh, wow, this girl, blah blah blah, you're in love, or at least you think you are. So you never really look at it from an objective point of view or from the outside. You're always on the inside looking out. And I never, you don't really think about it in any other way, at least at that point. And she was very, I don't know how to express it. It was, the way she lived her life was not a very healthy way. And we had differences that didn't really come out until later on, that I kind of overlooked, again, because I didn't really believe it, and I was just trying to, again, thinking, oh, this is who I want to be with, blah blah blah. So I had no ability to look at it objectively from a non-biased point of view, which is not good. You can't live your life like that. Otherwise, you're going to make mistakes. And I know there are a lot of people out there in the world today that do that. They don't have much ability to look at things from a non-biased point of view. They only see the way that they want to see it at the time. So if they're in love with someone and they think the person's great, doesn't matter what they really do, they're never going to see anything but the good parts of them. They're not going to see any of the negative. And this plays, when you think about it, this plays into this whole narcissistic point of view, because when two people start a relationship, there is always that possibility that one of them could be a narcissist and has a plan the whole time to take advantage of you and manipulate you and change your life to benefit theirs. And then when they've completed their task and they've changed you and they've manipulated you to the point where you second guess yourself and you're basically crazy from doubting yourself, they are finished. And it's kind of like that. You don't believe it, right? Like, people say that you're in a relationship where you're with someone who's abusive, or they don't really care about you, or they're cheating on you, or something like that is bad. And because all you see is this person who you met that's sweet and kind and loving and loves you and gives you things and gifts and takes care of you and such, that you don't believe it. You don't think that's true. And so you either end up alienating yourself from your friends and your family because you refuse to believe their advice, and they're seeing this from an objective point of view. They're not living in this biased world of yours. So it's either that, or something happens at some point in your relationship where you finally do wake up, and by then you've been living with that person for a long time. You've had a lot of abuse, whether it's emotional or physical, and you're either deep in it, and getting out is not an easy thing because they threaten you if you decide to leave. They're going to hurt you. They're going to hurt your family. They're going to do something that manipulates you to stay. And it's difficult to get out of that unless you be extremely brave and take bold steps to get out. And for a lot of people, that's extremely difficult for so many reasons, which is extremely sad. So it was kind of, the way the relationship ended was very, I guess you could say, a unique situation. Back in late November, she got a phone call from her, I think it was her mother, where she had to go in for surgery. She had a knee issue, and she had to get a knee replacement done. And so she was going to fly back to Ontario in December and be with the family while she, of course it was supposed to be a simple knee replacement, be in there for a few days, come out and then start rehab, and then she'd be back in a couple of weeks. And something went wrong, and her mother, I guess, had an obstruction in her digestive system that was nobody had been aware of. She knew, but she was afraid to tell anybody. She didn't want to express concern, so she was hiding it. And the surgery and everything complicated it, and she had a blood clot, and so she didn't come out when the anesthetic was to wear off. She never woke up, and so obviously something was wrong, and they thought she was improving. And then on December 25th of 2012, she passed away, and it was completely devastating to her, of course, because that's her mother, and it changed her. And I remember she didn't come home for a couple weeks, and when I saw her, you could just tell something was just different about her. And I remember it was kind of like this. I didn't see a lot of her at all, and she was obviously working through her pain and her loss. And then in March, she emailed me, and she ended the relationship. And it was quite surprising. I didn't expect that. I honestly didn't. I thought it's just going to take some time for her to grieve and move on and work through the pain and the suffering, and then things would start to get better. But I guess when she was in Ontario, she thought and realized, or at least in her mind, that she didn't want to be with someone who would hold her back, who would be like her father. And her father was, I guess you could say, abusive. And she saw what was happening, and she recognized everything. And so she was thinking she doesn't want to be in a relationship where the male person, like the man in the relationship, holds her back or prevents her from doing her life. And I just remember going, what the hell are you talking about? That's just, how can you say that about me? Like, it was ridiculous. I couldn't believe it. And it was a shock. Like, imagine someone thinking that you're going to be like their father, and that's not true. That's like, it's like unfathomable to even believe or to think that is something that a partner of yours is telling you. Like, I was fully supportive of her. I did everything for her. I wanted to be with her. And yet, as the weeks moved on after we broke up, and I remember discussing it with one of my friends, I started to realize, and once I got past the hurt and I was able to see this from an objective point of view, I noticed that there were things about her that would never have worked. She was bad with money. She was a workaholic. We didn't have the same beliefs and ideas or views on marriage. She didn't want to actually officially get married. She didn't think that was really a big deal, whereas I wanted to, of course. And it just took a while, and I finally woke up and went, holy shit. I'm glad that it's over, because if none of this had happened, if her mother had never passed away and we were still together, it would have at some point got to a situation where we would have ended it anyways, because our differences and her poor spending habits and bad financial situation would have made it incredibly difficult for us to do anything, to have a house, to have a family. She'd be in debt. It would take years to pay it off. And I I, of course, didn't see this while I was in the relationship because I was under this spell of, oh my God, I'm in a relationship, I'm in love, right? I wasn't able to see the truth. And so I moved on, and I realized that I need to change. I need to make some changes. I didn't fully know what I was doing or what I had to do because it was time, it took time. I had a new job. I had been working for a year roughly with the provincial government in Alberta. I was really enjoying what I was doing. I was working from Spruce Grove, which is where I lived. So I really I was in a very comfortable situation, but emotionally and relationship-wise, personally, I was struggling. I didn't know where I was going. And this is when things started to really take a turn for the worse. So back in late 2012, I think it was the summer, I started experiencing some really odd things physically, and it was disturbing and started to traumatize me and really scare the shit out of me. And I was experiencing this like very extreme discomfort in my legs. And what it was is when I would sit in my car, and it would be like 5 minutes or so into the drive, I would start to feel this really odd this odd sensation. The way I can describe it, it was like, it wasn't shooting pain. It wasn't like where I was like, oh my God, my leg is so hard, it's hurting so bad and it's excruciating. It kind of felt like it was like pins and needles, but more like, how do I explain this? I had a hell of a time explaining it to my doctor back then. And now when I think about it, it's still difficult to explain. Partially because there's a lot of trauma behind it. It was like my leg was going asleep, and there was these electrical sensations going down from the hip down to my foot, and it was doing it to both. And no matter what position I sat in or adjustments that I made or however I did it, it wouldn't go away. And it kept happening every time I would get in my car and start driving somewhere. And I remember the doctor gave me he said I had restless leg syndrome, which now when I think back is a bunch of bullshit, because that wasn't what it was. And he gave me this medication that was supposed to help take care of it, called gabapentin. And I started taking it, and I think it was a couple days in, I went on a vacation, on a holiday with my mom and my brother. Or was it just me and my mom? Well, anyways, we went to Saskatchewan to see my mom's side of the family. And about a third into the trip, I started noticing on my arms and on my legs that I was getting these red splotches, like a rash or like a hive kind of thing. And it was everywhere, and it was really itchy, and I was starting to freak out, going, what in the hell? Am I having an allergic reaction? Did something happen? Did I eat something? And it was scary, right? And I got to Lloydminster, which is halfway, and I remember getting out of the vehicle, and I was really panicking. I was not feeling good. I was just kind of stressing out and getting really worried and wondering, why am I feeling this? I wasn't sick. I wasn't feeling sick to my stomach. I wasn't high fever. I wasn't anything other than that. I was just breaking out in an allergic reaction. And I got to Saskatoon, and I'm I got some Benadryl, and I went to the pharmacist and I asked him about this, and he told me, okay, so what are you taking? Like, what kind of medication are you taking? Medication? I said, yeah, I'm taking this restless leg syndrome medication, gabapentin. And we determined that it seems likely that the gabapentin is what's causing it. And I'm like, oh, great. But I wasn't convinced 100% because obviously it could be other things. He didn't say it's absolutely this, but he said it's likely. So I took the allergy medication, and when it took effect, it went away. But I remember waking up the next day, and it was like back, of course, right? So I'm continually having this stressful moment, and I'm taking a lot of Benadryl, and I had a horrible weekend. And I got back and I went to the doctor, and he said, I have a feeling it's this medication. So in order to know for sure, I had to get off of it and then start taking it again, which that's crazy, but that's just the way it is, right? That's how you figure it out. And yeah, it did end up being that medication. And because when I started taking it again, sure enough, a couple days later, all the hives and everything started to come back. And it takes a day or two for the medication to wear off. And so that was the beginning. And it only started to get worse over time. What ended up happening is I was starting to get, like, my legs were starting to do this weird muscle twitching and shaking, and I'd get this really bad pain, and it was like throughout my arms were getting really painful and like shaking, and I was in extreme distress and extremely uncomfortable. I was, oh my God, like I was like going crazy. I was starting to lose my mind because I didn't know what was going on. And then to make matters worse, because I was doubting, like I didn't know what to think. So I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to go online and I'm going to go to those stupid online doctor, diagnose yourself pages, which is like, don't do that. Just stay away from these places. They're stupid. They don't do anything. All they end up causing is more stress than anything. So stay away from these online diagnosing pages. It's going to save you a ton of stress. Just leave them alone. Go to your doctors. Okay. So I went and I put in the symptoms that I was experiencing. And it's tough to say because I don't really like thinking about it, but the thing that came up was ALS, which, as you are aware of, is a terminal disease that in the neurons of the body shut down and your muscles start to waste and you become paralyzed, where you have no mobility, your muscles waste away, you can't breathe on your own, you are not able to move, and the average lifespan is like 2.5 years, although there are the odd person that does live a few years longer or so. And then you have like someone like Stephen Hawking, who lived to be in his 70s before he passed away. So I'm sure you can guess that I was freaking out. Like I was in such a panic and so stressed and feeling so much anxiety that I was going crazy. I couldn't sleep. I would think about it at night and I would freak myself out so bad that I was literally, my heart would be pounding like crazy, and I'd be sweating and I'd be worried, and I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't go to my parents and say, oh my God, I'm freaking out. I think I'm dying or something. I did remember staying over because I was panicking, but I never really told them why exactly it was. I think I made something up to cover for it, but I kept going. There was, I think, a period where I went to the doctor like 4 times over a 2-3 week period. And I was afraid of telling him. I couldn't tell him. I was so scared because my thought was that if I say something to him, he's gonna either tell me I'm crazy, or he's gonna order the tests, and then it's gonna come out true, and then I'm gonna be like, I'm dead, I'm gone, I'm done, I'm mortified, right? So I was so scared of bringing up this horrific thought that I just would never tell him. And so I went, oh my God, I kept going day after day, month. I'd have episodes where my body would act up and I was having problems. I was in a constant state of panic and anxiety and high stress levels. I went to Saskatchewan in 2013 for the Grey Cup, and I remember my mind was consuming the thoughts, and my body pain and the discomfort that I was having was pretty much the entire time. And I just remember being heavily distracted. I had a very difficult time enjoying the week. I couldn't really focus on anything except for that. There was the odd time where I was able to, but my mind was always really focused on the pains I was experiencing and the thoughts, of course, of what I was thinking. And I remember the game had ended on the Sunday, and I was standing at the gate, like the railing that was just before the field. And for a brief moment, I was so happy and so thrilled at this rare, unique moment that I got to experience that for a while I stopped thinking about it. I forgot about everything. And all I could feel was I was happy and I was excited and I was like, this is awesome. This is amazing. Who knows if I'll ever get to experience this again. My favorite team that I admire and that I follow religiously, winning their league championship at their home field in front of their fans. It was like amazing. It was one of my life's best moments that I will always remember. And the fact that I was able to have a brief moment away from all the stress and the anxious feelings and the pain and the mental anguish that I was going through was so nice and so relieving. But it was far from over. Far from over. There was a point eventually in my life where I started to understand the reality is that I didn't have this. I didn't have ALS. I wasn't going to die. I was just dealing with some discomfort. I had medical problems. I had something going on in my body that was causing it. And I had a difficult time trying to figure it out. I didn't know where to go. The first few physical therapists that I saw weren't helping me whatsoever. Matter of fact, the first one that I went to see, I got triggered and I was freaking out and I felt scared out of my mind when I got home, or as I was driving and got home. I was just freaking out because my thoughts came back to this whole thing. And eventually I found a therapist that started to help me. And I saw her for 3 years. I got an MRI of my neck and my back done. And I discovered that I had an injury on my neck that had occurred when I was 13 from football. And I'll explain what happened. I was playing in a football game. It was actually the last game for that level before high school. And I was running the ball. I'm the quarterback, and I'm running down the field, and I made a mistake. I had a player coming to tackle me, and instead of going and leaning down, like getting your shoulders down and leaning into the player like you're supposed to when you're gonna have a hit coming, I stood straight up. Like I literally was like straight, and oh, that was so dumb. he hit me in the legs, and I did a 180 in the air and landed on my head. He had a separated shoulder, and I didn't think that I had anything wrong. I didn't lose any feeling. Nothing happened, right? Like, as far as I knew, nothing was wrong. So I shook it off. I went to the sidelines, did a few tests, checked it out, and a few minutes later I was fine, and I went back in the game. Well, that was the stupidest thing I ever did. I should have, even if it hadn't been right away, I should have gone to the doctor, and I should have said, okay, this is what happened. And they should have checked it out. They should have done if anything, they could have set up an MRI. They could have done some tests, physiotherapy, and I could have avoided where I am now. And I had no idea. I was a kid. I'm 13 years old. What the hell do I know, right? And I have a father who doesn't think of these things. And so nobody, and not even the person who, like, we didn't exactly have a doctor or anything as our team doctor. It was just some volunteer paramedic or whatever. And they should have taken me to the hospital, at least. At the very least, they should have done that. And nobody even thought about it. I never thought about it. We just moved on. And my shoulder injury came like a year later. And I thought it was just from me overdoing like the movement and the arm throwing, and I worked too hard on it. Turns out my neck was starting to already degrade some of the muscles and some of the in the neck and the back or shoulder area. So that's what caused it. And today I have a lot of problems with my neck and pain and weakness and muscle issues that are very, very, very difficult to fix. And I'm doing whatever I can. And my back injury, okay, it's like multiple piling on problems that if it wasn't one thing, it's the other. I have a back problem where I got rolled over by a fat kid when I was 11. And it did something to the vertebrae in the bottom, like really near the tailbone, very low end, and it was causing pain. There was definitely a change in the way it was set, and I have a lot of issues, physical issues, and I've seen everybody. I've seen all the experts, all the different doctors, all the tests have been done. The only thing that I hadn't had done until recently was where I saw this pain specialist who inserted some cortisone into there, and he believed that I am developing spinal stenosis, and that's the cause of leg discomfort because I have a lot of issues. And so that's where the pain in the legs that I explained to you a number of minutes ago came from. So all the symptoms, all the problems that I was experiencing from 2013 all the way up to quite recent that I thought was due to this illness that I was dying was because of my neck and my back. And it, even after, and this is where the trauma, this is where the anxiety and the flashbacks and all that stress and the discomfort that I went through in my 20s and my 30s, especially in my 30s, came from this. Because even though I knew, like, it took a few years, I think it was like 3 years before I was finally starting to get convinced that I did not have this disease and that I was not going to die. And I was fine for the most part, but every so often something would trigger me. And I had a name for this thing that I was experiencing, and I said every few months, I would have an episode. And the way I would explain it is that in my arms and in my legs, I would get, it kind of felt like there'd be an inflammation, and it would be, it's like the muscles would get tight, or they'd start to ache more, and so they'd get inflamed, and they'd start to, and it felt to me like I had reduced abilities. Flexibility, dexterity was reduced. I didn't have as much, like my ability to pick up things, or to like using a screwdriver and tightening or putting something together. My hand would wear out, and I'd get tired awful fast. So this is where, so you can imagine where that anxiety and that fear would come in, because you're using your hand and it would tire out really fast. And when you know in your mind what all the symptoms are of ALS that are warning signs that your muscles are degrading, you're starting to lose function, that's something that in my brain would always trigger me. I'd be putting a shelf together, and my hand would get tired really fast, and I'd have to take a break. And I would force myself to dissociate or to zone out while I'm doing it, because if I didn't, that would be the thoughts that would consume my head or in my mind. And it would get so overwhelming that I'd get very triggered, and then I'd be done for the rest of the night, because I would be so focused on that I wasn't aware of things that were going on. I'm blanked out. I'm not being myself. And when I'd have an episode, the change that I would feel would really make me stressed out. I would be constantly triggered. I'd have bad days. I'd have a week where I would barely want to do anything, but I would be forced to. So I did a lot of emotional eating. I put on a lot of weight. In 2017, I weighed the maximum weight that I had on my body was 244 pounds. And a lot of that was because I was eating a lot. I was emotionally eating. I was dissociating. I was freaking out all the time. So I would go across the street and buy candy or chips, or I would buy or order fast food, and I would eat a lot. And I put on a lot of weight. And it was because it was so scary that I had to have some kind of comfort. So I would buy the chips, and I'd sit on my chair, and I'd turn on movies or TV, and I'd sit there all day. And then my dog would always be at the dog park earlier. So, I'd have my evenings to myself. So I had a routine. I'd get everything done, make my dinner or get dinner or whatever. And then I'd sit on the couch all evening until bedtime. And that's what I would do. And I would zone out and dissociate, because I didn't want to deal with the stress and the anxiety and the pain and all that fear in my head that was causing so much problems. And I had such a hell of a time getting past it that's what I would do to make it go away, or at least to get through day after day. And then eventually, over a week or so, sometimes 2 weeks, the inflammation and the pain and everything that I was experiencing would dissuade or go away, and I would feel better. But it would take a couple days for the thinking, like the trauma, the flashbacks, to stop being in my head, right? It'd be stuck in my head. And I would repeat this. So this was the beginning of where I was having anxiety. And it wasn't, and this is the problem, is that it wasn't just the body issues, like my pain issues, the discomfort, that fear of dying was there, but it wasn't that. I was starting to have bad anxiety for everything. I would have anxiety for work issues that were super minor, that were not a big deal, but I would get overwhelmed, and I'd get scared and think the worst. I'd get issues whenever I try to date someone or try to meet somebody. I'd get overwhelmed. I'd get overwhelmed at home. Any situation that was potentially threatening or scary or uncomfortable, I'd get triggered, and I'd feel traumatic scare, like extreme anxiety. I was a mess. I was not myself. It was horrible. And it only started at that point, because this was such a bad terrible experience and so traumatic on me that it was bringing everything out. All the anxiety, all the pain, all the past that I had experienced was starting to come out. And I was really scared because I thought when I wasn't thinking that I was dying, I was thinking, this is too much. I can't work. How am I going to be able to work? I can't focus. I'm too scared. Everything that would occur would be like 10 times worse on me. But the reality is that there wasn't anything at all. And it was really scary. Like it would been 7 years since the initial crazy thinking that I was dying, that I was having this disease. And every time that I would have an episode or I would feel like shit because of the inflammation, my brain would get traumatized and bring that back. And that's all I could think about. It was insane. And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't want to see a therapist. I was very skeptical. I didn't think, I was at the point where I was like, why would I want to share anything with someone who has no idea who I am? They don't know me. They don't know my past. They're a stranger. Why would I want to share stuff with them? But that's the reality. That's what it is. But you got to find, the thing that I didn't know, of course, is that you got to have to find the right person. You can't just go to any therapist and tell them about your experiences. You have to find the right one. And my first attempt didn't work. Well, one, I had really no coverage, so I was going to be paying for it out of my own pocket, and that's just ridiculous. At $200 a pop, forget it. My coverage only covered 2 appointments, so what good was that? And so in 2020, late 2019, when I had been dating my current girlfriend for 6-7 months, I was finally convinced to see a therapist, and he did turn out to be the right one, and I'm still seeing him. And thankfully, it has been working. But the revelations now, all the things that I've talked about in all my episodes, and all my struggles and my pain and the trauma that I'm experiencing today, is from my present stuff. My CPTSD that I didn't know I had until 2019. Learning that it was the root of the trauma was from my father, and then extending it was from the bullying in high school that I always, school in general, that I was always receiving, the manipulation, the harassment, the trickery, the devious shit that was being pulled. But it was mostly the trauma from my father, and then that relationship trauma. But it all worked its way into my life. How I act, how I behave, the way I talk, the way I think, how I react to my girlfriend talking to me or bringing up something that is bad, difficult situations, conflict. That all comes from the CPTSD. My ADHD, which, of course, for the longest time, I believed is or was genetic. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a little bit of it that I still think has some genetic backing, but I do think a lot of it is from my trauma, from my early childhood. There is a lot of research out there, and I do have an episode that is just coming out where my ADHD is actually my CPTSD, my childhood trauma, because the development of the brain due to the trauma is very similar, extremely close to the way an ADHD brain develops when the child is born and when he grows up. That's why my thinking now and I'm working on me getting it to be more and more likely that that is the case, is that I have my ADHD is actually from my CPTSD, from my childhood trauma. So a lot of the things like the bad memory, the poor working memory, the executive function problems, my impulsiveness, a lot of the problems that I have, like forgetting to like stuff when I'm trying to get to work, my need for routines, you know, the very standard way of living that I have is because of my trauma. It's a way of distracting. It's a way of keeping myself busy. It's a way of making my life as workable and as doable as possible, because without it, I'd be constantly traumatized and triggered, and I wouldn't be able to do anything. I wouldn't be able to live my life if I didn't have the way my life is, the way my schedule works, the way I am always busy, always trying to do something, always trying to be focused on something, because it's better than what life would be without it. And life can be a living hell. If it wasn't for the people that I have in my life, and even my girlfriend, despite the fact that we are having our difficulties and we are having our struggles in our relationship, even her, all these people in my life that I have that have been there for me, my closest friends, my therapist, my naturopath doctor, the people that I talk to online, my friends on Twitter that I talk to all the time, a lot of my family members that I trust enough to tell them about my struggles, they all make it worthwhile. And I don't want you to think that I'm not happy with my life, okay? I'm not in a place that is dangerous. I don't need help. I've never ever once even remotely thought about doing anything harmful to myself or ending my life. That's never ever been in my brain. I have a lot of regrets, but I also am thankful for a lot of the people and the things that I have in my life today. The most important person or animal or whatever in my life today is my dog. I bet you that's what you weren't expecting me to say. My dog Murray, if you go to my website, livingwithadhdandcptsd and CPTSD.ca, and you go to the About Me page, there is a picture of my dog. He is 8.5. He's not an official support dog, of course, but I, in the last while, have considered him to be my support dog. He's like my child. He's like that person that I love with, like, unconditionally. I would do anything for my dog. I give him the best life possible. I feed him the best food that I can get. I make sure he's healthy. I get him out all the time. I talk to him like a human would to another human. I treat him different than other people tend to treat their dogs. He's the most important person in my world. Now, number 2 is my girlfriend, of course, but this is different because a dog loves you unconditionally back. He's not going to be critical. He's not going to hate the certain things that you do in life. He's going to love you no matter what. And he's always there to greet you at the end of the day. If I've had a rough day, seeing him makes everything better. It's worth all of it. And seeing him happy makes me happy. So I'm a very loving person. I'm a very caring, very kind, very concerned person, but I'm also a very skeptical and a very sensitive person. I'm not exactly just going to be friends with everybody. I don't have a lot of friends, and my close friends are very, very few. But the friends that I do have, we are extremely close. We share everything. We have no real things that we don't talk about. And I would do anything for them. I would give them anything. I am supportive of everything. I'm never going to say no to them. I'm never going to turn them away. I'm going to do whatever I can for my friends. And for my family, I think they're amazing. I have learned a lot about my family. Some of the opinions and some of my thoughts have changed, but how I feel about them has never changed. There are things in my life that I have learned a great deal of and about to such a wide degree that I could probably write a book 1,000 pages long and to be able to describe it. I am someone who does a lot of talking, and I'm very expressive, and I always go far beyond what is need to be said. Some people get annoyed by it, and some people don't mind it. I am definitely not a man of few words. If you knew me and you were a friend of mine, that's how you would notice me. If you were someone who I just met or you were a stranger, I tend to choose my words carefully, and you need to earn my trust before I will let you in. It's not a simple thing. And that's just because of how I was raised and how I am and the experiences I've been through. I'm not afraid to share my life experiences. I'm not afraid to share my thoughts on here. My feelings about what I've gone through and the feelings that I feel when I see other people going through similar difficulties and issues and struggles in their life are hard to handle sometimes. I often find myself walking away and not wanting to talk about it rather than bring it up, because there are times when it's too much to handle and I want to just go and zone out. I want to turn on the TV and watch something that I enjoy, something that takes my mind away from day to day. And I realize that I have a long way to go in my healing. I've done a lot of work. It's been 3 years since I started therapy and since I've understood and gained all the knowledge and the experiences that I have when it comes to complex trauma and ADHD and other areas of mental illness. And yet there's still a long way to go because there's so much that I don't know and things that I struggle with, because you don't realize until you start just how hard it is to go and begin the process of healing. Complex trauma is not an easy thing. It's not like going into the hospital and getting your arm fixed because it's broken, or having surgery on a torn tendon, or getting your teeth fixed. It doesn't just heal in a few days or weeks. You don't recover and you don't go and start lifting weights or start brushing your teeth on a regular basis and flossing and making sure you're doing everything you can to keep your teeth healthy. It's not that simple. When you realize that you're experiencing trauma and you're getting triggered a lot and you've got complex trauma and there's pain from your past, emotional, physical pain, and it makes your life extremely difficult to handle, you soon start to realize just how hard dealing with it every day can be. And it's not a simple healing process. By no means are you going to be healed in a year or 2 years. Most people, when they are trying to heal, And I mean heal successfully, not some half-assed method that doesn't really work. If you're doing it right and you find the right therapist who knows his stuff and is doing the right therapy, then it can take 5 and even up to 10 years to properly heal. And despite all the stuff out there, and there are people out there who say that you can't really heal or be cured of your complex trauma. Well, that's not true. There are therapies and theories out there that are showing that if you do the work and you do it right and you take your time and you work hard, you can cure yourself of your CPTSD and you won't experience any more triggers, no more trauma, no more flashbacks. It can be done. It's just, it takes the right work. It takes hard work. It takes time. And it takes dedication. It's going to be the hardest thing you ever do in your life. Nothing else will ever compare to the hard work that you have to put in order to heal from complex trauma. The research is still new. This isn't a very old diagnosis. This illness is not very old. It's not like PTSD that they first started to come to light after World War II, or I think even World War I, where it was very minimal, right? They call it shell shock. There's been a lot of study and research and different people that they've studied that have gone through complex trauma, trauma, PTSD. And the idea of complex trauma is still very recent, and the amount of information that's out there is still new. It's still relatively light. There's a lot out there that has yet to come up. The number of people who are going to be diagnosed with complex trauma in the next 10 to 20 years is going to rise steadily. And now with the understanding that there are a lot of people who have ADHD are actually getting it from their complex trauma during their childhood. There's many different things out there that are coming up that we're just starting to learn. Mental health support is still at its minimal amount, and it needs to be way higher. It's sad that there are countries out there that don't take mental health seriously at all, or it's very minimal. They're more interested in spending money on their military and other stupid things when they could take care of their country and their citizens' mental health. They could put billions of dollars into mental health care, pay for more therapists, pay for more psychologists and psychiatrists, increase the support. There's so much out there that needs to be done. And I'm really scared that it's going to get to the point where it's going to be unable to be handled because we're going to be unprepared. We're not going to be ready for it. This pandemic has shown us just how fragile we are, not just as adults, but as children. And we're not even close to finished. I realize that people are moving away from COVID and they think that it's over and they're not wearing masks. They don't think they need to get vaccinated anymore, or they have no desire to get vaccinated. There's all this very polarized point of views on both sides. But a lot of them aren't looking at the other aspect of mental health when it comes to this pandemic. We're going to be dealing with this for many years to come. There are going to be people who are going to be that are going to start experiencing mental health issues. And some of them are going to be strong enough to say, okay, I need help. I need to find a therapist. I need to figure out what the hell is going on. And unfortunately, sadly, there are going to be some that aren't going to have the strength to do it. And it's going to be too much. And they're going to end it. They're not going to be able to do it. We're going to have a lot of people who are going to die from mental illness, and more specifically from trauma. The last thing I'm going to say here is that, as I have explained in a couple other episodes, there is a study out there, and there are facts and evidence that of all the leading causes of death in the United States, trauma is 63% of the deaths. Now, I don't mean trauma, just blank. It's all the unknowns, all the things that come from it. Addictions, like childhood trauma, horrific events like accidents, wars, ambulance drivers, police officers, medical experts, like people who just can't handle their mental health or their mental illness, and they feel like they have nobody to reach out to, so they end up committing suicide. There's a lot of people out there who are not getting the support that they so deserve and need, and they're dying. And it's extremely sad, and it's wrong. There needs to be way more work and support out there for people with mental illnesses. And I feel fortunate that I was able to realize and was strong enough to get out there and get the help that's required. I'm a very, very strong person. I easily could have given up, and I could have been done, and I could have just walked away from everything. But I am so strong and so brave when it comes to this that I refuse to give up. I refuse to just lay back and say, no, I'm not going to take care of it. I have days and times where I feel that it's hard or it's too hard, but ultimately I never give up. I never quit. I have never, ever once quit. I want you guys out there who are listening to this to realize that you are never alone. There's family, there's friends, there's social workers, there are mental specialists, healthcare experts out there, psychiatrists, psychologists. There are ADHD and CPTSD coaches out there that can help you. They can guide you along your way. They can make sure that you are taking care of yourself, that you are making the right choices, that you're getting the therapy, that you're getting the help. You are not alone. There are people out there who want to look after you and want to help take care of you. But the bottom line is it is your choice. You have to decide to go and get the help. No one else can do it for you. You can't be forced to get help. You have to realize on your own when you're ready that you have to get help, that it's time. And it can be anything. It could be the trauma. It could be mental health. It could be ADHD. It could be dyslexia. You could have bipolar. You could be a schizophrenia person. You could have depression. There's so many things out there that require assistance, but the only way you're going to get it is from you deciding and finally taking action and getting the help that you deserve and that you require. Then you can start to heal. But you got to have a realistic look, and you got to be realizing that this is going to be hard. This is not going to be an easy fix, but it's worth it. Find the help, find the right help, and get to the point where you can start to heal and be happier and have a healthier life. All right, that's it. I realize this is a very long episode, and I am very thankful for those who managed to get through to the end. I hope a lot of you do, because this is a very personal and very important episode that I'm putting out there. So if you have listened to this and you think this is very important and that other people need to hear this episode, tell them about it. Tell them all. Go on Twitter. Express that you think people need to watch or to listen to this. Have them subscribe to the podcast. It is an inexpensive subscription. It's well worth it. Lots of bonus material out there. You get early access to all the new episodes that come out. It is worth it. If you want to donate to me, the best way to do it is go to ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/livingwithadhd and CPTSD. If you want to contact me, you have comments, concerns, you want to chat, maybe you want to be a guest on my podcast, whether it's for ADHD or CPTSD, you can contact me through Twitter. The handle is @ADHD and CPTSD. You can email me. My address is livingwithadhdandcptsd@gmail.com. You can go to my website, as I explained, I gave it earlier. Again, it is livingwithadhdandcptsd.ca. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. I know it was a long episode. I hope it was worth it for you as it was for me in creating it. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye for now.